I just told Jim I know of at least one founding father who would be proud of those remarks. His name was Dr. Dwight Bentel. Thank you, Jim, for those remarks. We certainly appreciate it. This week, we invited faculty and students in the School of Journalism and Mass Communications to submit questions to our honoree. And so we asked some of them earlier in a student session, and that was one of the most remarkable learning experiences I've ever seen on this campus. So we thought we'd do it again. But tonight, 2 members of our faculty have been selected to offer some of those questions to Jim on behalf of all of us. My 2 colleagues, by the way, here are graduates of this program, so we're happy about that. Journalism professor Halima Kazem Stojanovic is an international reporter who's worked for a variety of news organizations, including the Los Angeles Times and the San Francisco Chronicle. And Dr. Sean Fletcher, our newest public relations professor this fall, is a former communications manager for Apple here in the Silicon Valley. Jim, good luck.
Well, thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
We're honored to have you at our school and
Thank
to
you.
be sitting up here with you. So, as a journalist who's covered international issues, I spent a long time covering the war in Afghanistan. The harrowing death of Jamal Khashoggi, as you mentioned in your remarks, has been sitting with me. What does this tragedy say about the state of media and globally and here in the U.S.? And does it change anything in what you do on a daily basis?
Well, I think, first of all, one thing that we should recognize is how long the Khashoggi story stayed in the news. You know, we get accused so often in the press of, we just chase the next headline, the headline moves to the next day, and we've moved on to the next story. I feel like the Jamal Khashoggi story stayed in the news, at least in our coverage, for a good 2 weeks. And I'm so glad that it did, because it revealed so much. It sent a powerful message to the world. I mean, it is just tragic. It is awful that Jamal Khashoggi lost his life. We have colleagues at CNN who knew him personally. But I think this whole episode has sent a powerful message across the world about the importance of having a free press, and what a threat a free press is to authoritarian governments, and how some journalists around the world are not exactly free to do the work that they want to do. They don't have the same freedoms that we cherish and sometimes take for granted here in the U.S. And so there were just so many powerful and layered dynamics to that story that I think were just so critical for all of us to reflect on. There were geopolitical issues, this dynamic between Turkey and Saudi Arabia. Here we have Erdogan, the leader of Turkey. All of a sudden, he's a champion for the press. No, he's been a disaster to the free press in Turkey. But he sort of had the Saudis over a barrel through all of this, and so you were seeing sort of this power play going on in that part of the world, where Erdogan was trying to show he had the upper hand over Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And so, to some extent, the public, the general public, was getting like, we get so accused so often of just like, the fluff and the flash and the trash and, that sort of thing. But the public was really getting like deeply immersed in some very important geopolitical subjects, as we were all talking about that as well. So I found the whole thing to be fascinating, and then to watch the way that the White House was dealing with it, the Trump administration was dealing with it. I mean, there are some major, major implications for the United States, putting everything I said earlier aside. Liz and I were actually in Saudi Arabia covering the president last year, and we were reminded vividly of some of the conditions that are going on in Saudi Arabia. There was a day when we said, hey, let's go find a historic site to go see. And I Googled, things to see in Riyadh. And one of them was this fortress that I guess was a critical site of a battle that had occurred that led to the creation of Saudi Arabia. And we're like, okay, great, let's go there. So we get in a car, the driver's taking us over there. And he goes, oh yes, I know where this place is. It's right next to where they do the chop chop. And I said, what is that? You know, is that, what? He goes, yeah, you know, the head, chop chop. He goes, the head. The historic site that we went to was right next to a public beheading square. And not to get, I don't want to get too graphic and whatnot, but this is a government in Saudi Arabia that is buying a lot of weapons from the U.S. and dropping an enormous amount of ordnance and bombs on innocent civilians in Yemen. I mean, and that is something that CNN has led the charge on in terms of exposing. We had a major story a couple of weeks ago that showed all of the U.S. logos on some of the bombs that had blown up and had been used to kill a lot of innocent people there. And so I think that this entire episode, not to belabor the point, has given us a lot to think about in multiple areas. Freedom of the press, but also our relationship with the rest of the world and who we choose to be friends with, who we choose to be allies with. That's a critical and a very important question, and I think it's one that the administration has had a difficult time answering in recent days.
So, Jim, and again, can you all hear me okay? Can't hear me at all.
Can you hear me? You can. I have a loud mouth.
We'll just do a mic swap. How about that? On the fly. So, Jim, thanks again for coming. I had the opportunity to sit in on your student session, and I had a class directly after, and they were just so excited, and they were pleasantly surprised by your candor. So I as well, and I appreciate that. Yeah. And much of what I took away from your remarks really resonated with me, and I would assume many of my colleagues as well in communication. Words matter. Right. And words are powerful in shaping reality. And I'm glad that you led in with the Khashoggi situation, because in a similar vein, we were kind of told to believe us, not your lying eyes. Right. And on that note, fake news, alternative facts. Yeah. Those are terminologies that have really become firmly entrenched in our American lexicon. How does that impact your ability to remain objective first? Yeah. And also, do you feel the need to lobby for really what truth is before you can actually do your job in uncovering it? Yeah. I mean, one of the questions, and that's a great question, I mean, one of the questions I get asked is, well, do you sometimes veer into the lane of advocacy and activism and that sort of thing? I will say this, there's nothing wrong if you're a journalist with being an advocate for a free press and for freedom of speech. That's a no-brainer, folks. I'm sorry. I'm going to keep doing that one. So if that one ticks you off, I'm sorry, you're in big trouble. You know, it's just not going to work out for you. Now, if I were to go out there and advocate for the GOP tax plan, or if I were to say it's a great thing that we pulled out of the Paris climate deal, or if I were to advocate for Obamacare and this, that, and the other thing, CNN would pull me off the air. I can't go out there and advocate for different political positions, but I can advocate on behalf of a free press. And what we're seeing these days, where you have the administration using terms like alternative facts, and Rudy Giuliani recently said the truth isn't truth, and then this week in the Oval Office, I was with the president asking about his claim that there were Middle Easterners in the caravan. And I said, where is your proof of this? And he finally, after a lengthy back and forth, he goes, well, there is no proof of anything. Which I thought was like you could print that on a banner. Remember, like Mission Accomplished? Yeah. You could put that on a banner and hang it over the White House. There's no proof of anything. It was emblematic of like this post-truth world that we're in right now. And so what do you do in that situation? It's sort of like that thing I said to Stephen Colbert. We can game this out. There are things we can do. It's like the choose your own adventure. You know, you can flip to page 27 if you're going to go down this road, and you can flip to page 43 if you're going to go down in that direction. The direction I've chosen to go down is you're not going to get away with lying to us. You're not going to get away with covering up the truth. You're not going to get away with bullying us and calling us fake news and the enemy of the people. It's just, you're not going to, CNN can yank me off the air if they get tired of me doing this, but I rest better at night, and I know when I look back at this time period, I'm going to feel better about myself if I've chosen that adventure, if I've chosen that path, to say you can't shut us down, you can't shut down the truth, you can't throw these terms like alternative facts at us and get us to believe what you're saying. It's just not going to work. That's the way, and that's how I feel. Absolutely.
And I'm not trying to play to the audience and rev things up. I just get passionate about it, and that's
Absolutely.
just what I say.
But doing it so often
Yeah,
takes a lot of time and energy
It
and
does.
your airtime.
right.
And is it a way of distracting you from digging deeper than just establishing the facts?
There is that. There's that criticism, well, you're making yourself the story and you're injecting yourself into the story. You know, when the president calls you fake news, you've sort of been roped into this, you know, and when he calls us the enemy of the people, we've been pulled into this. And so to some extent, again, it's that we can game this out. We can do nothing. We can hold back. We can just take these punches and that's it. And he wins, we lose. He calls us the enemy of the people. We accept it. We don't say anything. But I just don't think that gets us anywhere. And moreover, it just sends a terrible message to the young students that you guys are trying to educate here. I mean, my goodness, how much harder would your job be if we were all required in this country to just take that kind of abuse? I mean, we just wouldn't stand for it. And if I didn't do it, somebody else would. You know, and I have colleagues who do stand up for these sorts of things. My friend and colleague April Ryan, many of my colleagues over at CNN, over at NBC, ABC, we've all just decided that we're not going to take this stuff. Now that does get to it. You do get to a very interesting point, which is if we're spinning our wheels so much, fighting back against this, doesn't that pull us away from our job? To some extent, it does. And here's why. If I wake up in the morning, look at my phone, and already, by the time I've opened my eyes, there's a falsehood in a tweet coming from the President of the United States, my day has already begun. Because at that moment, I'm waking up and I'm beginning to figure out what is going on here, why is he saying this, and don't we have to point out that he's not telling the truth? And you know, I run into this with Trump supporters at these rallies. They'll say, all you do is you point out the negative, and you're just saying negative things about him, and why won't you say something positive about him? And we go back and forth, and I say, well, we just talked about the stock numbers the other day, and the jobs numbers are doing pretty well, and yeah, he should get credit for that. But if we're pointing out falsehoods all day long and we're fact-checking them all day long, it does create this impression with some people that all we're doing is running them down. And again, it's sort of like that choose your own adventure. It's you can game this out. Okay, do we not call him out when he tells a bunch of whoppers and lies and says that they're Middle Easterners and caravans? There are millions of peace-loving Middle Easterners in this country who, I mean, it's really just, I mean, over the top to create that kind of impression and put that sort of message out there, well, because they're Middle Easterners in the caravan, that somehow they're terrorists there. That's not fair to them. And so we do, because we are trying to fact check him, and that's where a lot of Republicans are like, this is how the president gets the upper hand with the press, because we get you guys spun up into a frenzy and so on. But that shouldn't stop us from doing our jobs. We still have to do our jobs.
So Jim, after, and you touched on this in your remarks a bit earlier, thankfully after the failed terrorist bombing attempts yesterday, much of the sentiment coming out of it was, this is what we were fearful of. This is what we were worried was going to happen in terms of the public reaction to the Trump administration rhetoric that's been coming out against the media. Now, while you can't control the rhetoric coming from the White House, what can you control, and what is your role, yours personally, but also the media, in starting to bring us away from the division and divisive rhetoric?
Yeah. Well, we have to do the news. We have to cover the news.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Jamal Khashoggi, that came out of nowhere, right? And we had to cover that story. And I don't know if that was necessarily an us versus the president or us versus the administration. It was just doing the news. And so to some extent, we're sort of helpless in terms of what the news flow is of any particular week. We have to follow the news cycle. We have to do the news. It's just the way it goes. But my sense of it is we, in terms of what our responsibility is in turning down the noise and the rhetoric and so on, I think that's really in the eye of the beholder. A lot of conservatives will be like, hey, you guys in the press, all you do is go after the president. It's all negative, 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 fake news, fake news. And I think to myself, well, sir, ma'am, we're not just doing the news for the Republicans, we're doing the news for everybody. And my goodness, if we weren't aggressively covering this White House, what would folks who are liberals and Democrats and progressives, what would they would be like, hey, you bum, you're not doing your job. You're letting these guys get away with all this stuff. And even people in the middle, and even some people on the Republican side would be like, well, gosh, they just let Trump say a bunch of lies. You didn't do anything about it. So to some extent, we're caught in a little bit of a conundrum in that we have to make a choice. We can either decide to do our jobs and let the chips fall where they may, or we just decide to be compliant and obedient. And I just don't think that's ever going to happen. Listen, this as I hope many of these professors have explained to their students, you're not going to be loved being a journalist. This is not. If you want to be loved, go be a veterinarian, or when a sick little kitten comes in, obviously that's the most wonderful thing in the world, to be able to heal the sick kitten. I don't do that. I make the president very mad at me, and the people at Fox News very mad at me, because we aggressively cover this White House. But I just think we have to keep doing our jobs, and be mindful of the fact that we can get over our skis. When I was in the Oval Office and I was trying to hold his feet to the fire on the caravan issue a few days ago, I just told myself, be calm, stay cool, be composed, don't let them get under your skin, don't take the bait, because I don't want the viewers out there to see Donald Trump telling whoppers, but Jim Acosta's out of control over here. Because the viewers are going to be like, well, there goes Donald Trump telling whoppers again, but what's wrong with Jim? And then Fox News, and then Sean Hannity has a segment. He did this over the summer. Jim Acosta unhinged. That was a segment. And I had the screenshot. Luckily, he had a picture of me smiling. So it was a little strange, because it was like Jim Acosta unhinged, and I'm like, I'm smiling over here. I'm like, well, I don't look unhinged. I look very happy, like, I had a beer or something. And the other thing that happens is a lot of the impressions people have at these rallies, they get from watching conservative media. And I'll go to these folks and I'll say, sir, ma'am, I understand you're very upset with me right now. Have you been watching CNN? Can I just ask you, do you watch CNN? Well, no, I watch Fox News. And well, of course, they're going to show the worst god-awful segments of me and my colleagues over on Fox News. They're not going to show unedited coverage of CNN over the last several years. And I used to give the Obama people heartburn too when I covered them, and I'd get calls from the press secretaries back then, Jay Carney and Josh Earnest, and so on. And I was telling the students earlier today, there was a time I remember when Dennis McDonough, the White House Chief of Staff, looked at me and goes, "Oh, there's Kim Jong-un right there," and I was like, "Whoa, geez," I feel like that's kind of an unfair thing to say. I'm in pretty good shape. I don't think I look like Kim Jong-un. But this is a tough line of work. We're not here to heal little sick kittens. We're here to do the news, and that means sometimes we're gonna upset some people.
Fair enough.
And so along that lines, according to Freedom House, a press freedom nonprofit group, press freedom globally has declined to its lowest levels in 13 years. And in the 2017 rankings, the US dropped 2 places. And the new rankings are not out, but it's expected that we've dropped even more. Are we at a point of no return? You talked about the shifting norm.
Yeah.
What would it take to shift it back? Is it just a new administration and waiting it out? Or has the norm really now is going to stick?
The new normal, that we're in right now. I mean, here's a couple of different things. And forgive me, it's like really late my time back on the East Coast. So if I sound like I'm droning on, just be like, Jim. It's like my producers in the control room. You're going too long. You're doing it again.
No, you're great.
Okay. Listen. There are a couple of things. One is a journalist could get hurt. That has not really happened yet. That is directly tied to the president's rhetoric. What happened at the Capital Gazette newspaper in Annapolis, initially some people were saying, oh, it's because of the president's rhetoric and so on. And it turned out this was a person who had a grudge with the coverage at that newspaper. But still, we thought at the time it was important to ask the president, hey, this is starting to happen. Shouldn't you knock this stuff off? And he hasn't knocked it off. I think if a journalist gets hurt, I think that's going to be a major event, and it's tied to the president's rhetoric. I think that's going to be a major event in this country, and it's going to cause a lot of people to look in the mirror and say, my goodness, do we really want to keep going down this road? I think that is potentially a paradigm shift that could occur. Yes, elections could also change things as well. But listen, I'll paint another scenario for you, which is the Republicans hang on to the House and the Senate, and he gets reelected in 2020. What's going to happen to the press then? My sense of it is that, you know, I don't want to have set up a cause and effect scenario where, okay, now we're really in dire straits because all of this has happened. But I do worry that our elected leaders are not doing enough to knock this stuff off. Where are our leaders in Washington saying, Mr. President, stop calling the press the enemy of the people? I think Ben Sasse, the senator from Nebraska, said it today on CNN, and I was like, wow, thank goodness. You know, this has been going on for over a year. It's great to have a member of Congress say this. I wish they had said it a year ago. And you know, I think there have been some big opportunities missed in that regard. And you know, we can speak up for ourselves, and we do that. I do that, as people have noticed. But the thing I would say is, if a journalist is hurt in this country and it's tied to the rhetoric coming from the White House, at that point we have become, in my view, something less than the United States of America. At that point, then you have the press in this country, and to some extent it happened this week with what happened in New York. You have the press looking over their shoulder. You have the press worried that they have a target on their back. That's not the country I grew up in. And I'm looking at some of these professors who are around my age and maybe a little bit older. You guys don't remember that either. There have been times, Nixon had his enemies list. Vietnam War, there were certainly some issues there. But my sense is that the climate has changed in ways that we haven't seen in our lifetimes. And we have to decide for ourselves as Americans whether or not we want to go down that road. And one other thing I want to point out, since I mentioned Vietnam, because people will say, well, Jim, you're being an advocate. We don't want to hear your opinion. Why are you? And I heard this at a Trump rally recently. Somebody goes, why don't you be like Walter Cronkite? Walter Cronkite didn't do this sort of thing. Walter Cronkite, he just played it right down the middle. No. Our journalism professors here are nodding. They understand. They remember during the Vietnam War, Walter Cronkite got so worked up, was so worried about some of these reports coming out of the field from his correspondents like Morley Safer and so forth. I used to work at CBS News. I've heard all these stories. Walter Cronkite went out there, took a look for himself, talked to the generals, came back, went on the CBS Evening News, and gave a report that said, essentially, in my observation, based on what I've seen and what I've reported on and what I've learned, I don't think you could draw any other conclusion than the Vietnam War will end in a stalemate, that the war can't be won. Now, that was the quote-unquote most trusted man in America at that time. And at that point, President Lyndon Johnson said, well, if I've lost Cronkite, I've lost America. And so, yes, the press can make observations about what they see. You can, there aren't two sides to a story when it's a matter of right versus wrong. I go back to the situation in Charlottesville. The president, first came out and gave that speech about what happened in Charlottesville. A lot of people said you didn't go far enough. You were blaming many sides or both sides for what happened in Charlottesville. So he came out a couple days later, gave a speech at the White House where he said, we condemn neo-Nazis and white supremacists and so on. And I was there in the room with him, and I said, well, why did it take you so long to do this? And he goes, you're fake. That was one of those episodes where he goes, you're fake news. The next day, he has that press conference, that infamous press conference at Trump Tower in New York, which, by the way, was not supposed to be a press conference. They came downstairs. They told us in the press, you guys, he's just going to make some comments. It was Infrastructure Week, and he's going to make some comments, and he's going to go back up the elevator in Trump Tower. And instead, we started asking questions because he can't help himself. He can't resist taking questions. And what did he go back to saying? That there was blame to go around on both sides. And at one point, he said that there were very fine people on both sides. And at one point, I said to him, I didn't put it in the form of a question. I said, Mr. President, there are no fine people in the Nazis. And we went back and forth over, well, taking down statues is not right, and so on and so forth. You can go back and look at the tape. And so, yes, are we getting ourselves into a position where we might get out a little bit over our skis, and we might open ourselves up to criticism where people will say, hey, you're not being a journalist, you're not being a referee, you're not having a monk-like commitment to objectivity. I turn to what Christiane Amanpour said over at CNN, which is, I'm not here to give both sides, I'm here to give the truth. And I think that those are good words to live by for journalists. Yeah.
So staying
Am I
on
talking too
the
much?
activist journalist
Yeah.
topic that
Yeah.
you're talking about. During a recent press conference, you asked President Trump to call on a female reporter.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you do that? And from your behind-the-scenes perspective, do you see a big difference in how President Trump treats male and female reporters?
Yes, to the second question. It was interesting. We were having that press conference, and the questions were about Christine Blasey Ford, the woman who had accused Brett Kavanaugh of sexual assault when they were in high school. And, it was all about, well, who do you believe, Mr. President, and what do you think of this, and what do you think of that? And as he was starting this press conference, he was calling on this male correspondent, and he was calling on this male correspondent, and then he came over to me. He called on another male correspondent, and that person asked about Venezuela or something, and we were all like, dude, what's going on here? Venezuela is very important, but time and place, man. And then he comes to me, and I'm like, I'm the fourth guy in the room that he's called on. And, Stephen Colbert that night, was like, we get it, Jim, you're woke, or whatever. He went off on me and said that was kind of I won't say it because there are children in the room, but that was kind of a blank move. And I said, Mr. President, why don't you call on a woman next? And he was sort of like, well, what's going on here? Why did you ask that question? And I think then he finally got it. And he called on my colleague, Ouija, from CBS. And I did it because this president, I'm sorry, again, if you want me to be over here, if you want me to be journalist A over here, and I'm like, well, on one side it's like this, and on one side it's like that, I can do that for you if you want. But I was brought up blue collar. My mother worked in restaurants. My dad worked in the supermarket. We talk very plainly with one another, and that's what I bring to my job. The president has a problem with women. He just does. We know this. It's evident in what has happened in the past. My sense of it is that he was trying to, and maybe it was just a random thing that day, maybe I was wrong. It seemed to me he was trying to get through those questions about Brett Kavanaugh by calling on guys before finally getting to a woman who might actually hold his feet to the fire in ways that he doesn't like. And so I said that to him, and the press conference went on. I will say, a few days later in the Rose Garden, he had this interaction, I don't know if you saw it, with Cecilia Vega with ABC News, where he was quite rude to her. And I sent a note to one of my colleagues, one of my editors, and I was like, well, there you go, to me, it's not acceptable. It's just not, the behavior is not acceptable. And so, again, this goes back to what are you going to do about it? Do we accept the behavior, or do we call it out and do it in the most professional way possible? And that's what I try to do.
Final follow-up to that, I think that's a great way to end it. How do you toe that line between your convictions and your journalistic responsibilities?
Yeah.
And do you ever fear that you potentially would make yourself part of the headline and part of the story? And how do you reconcile the two?
Well, I tell you, I don't wake up in the morning and say, well, gee, how can I inject myself into the story today? Despite what some people might think. When I went back and forth with Stephen Miller over immigration, that to me was a very important moment in terms of what I've seen covering this White House. If you guys remember, this was they were coming in to explain these changes that they wanted to make to the immigration system, not building a wall on the border, that was a separate matter, but they wanted to change the legal immigration system, to cut the number of legal immigrants coming into this country by 50%. They like to say all the time, well, why are these folks just coming across the border illegally? Don't you know we have a legal immigration system? And then over here, they're like, well, now we want to cut the legal immigration system by 50%. But anyway, we'll put that aside for the moment. And we were going back and forth, and they were going over this merit system that they were going to have, that they wanted to put in place. If you spoke English, you got this number of points. If you had a PhD, you get this number of points. If you had an Olympic medal, this was one of the criteria in their merit system, you would get this number of points. And I said to Stephen, we went back and forth, you know, my sense of it is that they were trying to change the nature of our immigration system in this country. We've always, and that's when I read him the quote from the Statue of Liberty, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. And, you know, there's some people who think that's grandstanding and that's showboating and that's just trying to get ratings and get a book deal and a movie or have your face on Mount Rushmore, whatever the hell else they want to say. But to me, at that moment, and I was the last guy to get called on at the briefing. I was like, well, they're not going to call on me, man. They really hate my guts. And I said, you know what? This is the question I want to ask. Not about the policy, but what's behind the policy? What's the motivation behind the policy? And to me, it was about what is your worldview? What is your view of what America is all about? And is that driving what you're trying to do with this policy? That's what I was trying to get at. And he goes, well, Jim, as you know, that poem was attached to the Statue of Liberty several years later. You know, that's not what the Statue of Liberty is about. The Statue of Liberty is about, you know, lighting to the world and all this stuff. And I said, wait a minute, Stephen, you're engaging in national park revisionism, is what I said to him at the time. And are you telling me that the Statue of Liberty, talk about alternative facts, the truth isn't truth, and there's no proof of anything. You're going to tell me that the Statue of Liberty is not about immigrants coming in? And so then I got on the internet. I got on the Google. I like the kids do. And I found Ronald Reagan's speech from the mid-19... Remember when they restored the Statue of Liberty? Some of you can't remember this, but they restored this. They did this big project where they restored the Statue of Liberty, and they had this big unveiling in New York Harbor, and it was a beautiful event. Ronald Reagan came out there, gave this beautiful speech, and he talked about the immigrants who came to this country and helped set up the Statue of Liberty. The immigrants who came to our shores and saw the Statue of Liberty waiting for them with that beacon of light, welcoming them to this new country. And he talked about how the Statue of Liberty herself was of foreign birth. And to me, I just said, you know, here's a Republican president right here. The one that they all say this is, you know, this is the end-all be-all of Republican presidents. Ronald Reagan himself, former governor of California, saying that the Statue of Liberty was about immigration. And then I went on the website for the Statue of Liberty, National Park Service website. There's a link there that says the Immigrants Memorial. And there are pictures of children holding their parents' hands as they come into the United States. And so, you know, listen, you can't tell, they're trying to, in some cases, they're trying to pull the wool over our eyes. They're trying to tell us that, they're trying to sell us a bill of goods, and what we're seeing is not the truth. And that what they're telling us is the truth, when really it's far different. And the only thing I can tell people is that we're doing the best that we can on a daily basis. We're not going in there to try to elect Democratic candidates. We're not in there trying to advance progressive causes. We're not the resistance. We're journalists. We're here to fight for the truth. We're here to get the truth for the American people so they can make those informed decisions for themselves. And people can say what they want. They can say you're making yourself part of the story, or you're being an advocate, or you're being an activist. I see us as being activists for the truth. And if we're under attack, we should resist. We should resist if we're under attack. And I think that's our duty as journalists.
Well, Jim, in closing, and before I toss it back to Bob, thank you so much again for being here and sitting with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And
thank you.
And I must say that, as we said earlier backstage, Jim actually asked us to not throw him softball questions, even though this is an award ceremony.
No, it's okay.
So that is emblematic
Yeah.
of what we see of you as a professional. And I also learned that clearly that is emblematic of you as a person.
Thank you.
So thank you so much.
I appreciate it.
You are absolutely deserving.
Thank you
of this
so
honor.
much. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Stay right there. You're doing good. Stay right there.
Okay, I will. And thank you for being so kind as to listen to me as I sound very tired at this late
I can
hour
imagine,
as it is
you know.
for me. So
Yeah, you're on that Eastern clock. You
I
must be
am.
tired.
I can hear the producers in my ear saying rap, rap, rap. Anyway.
Well, Madam President, I've already suggested to him that he should become a professor someday. So anytime you want to help me recruit him, I'm on board.
The weather has
Okay?
already sold me. I already had my In-N-Out burger, so you know, you're halfway there. You're halfway there.
Before we finish, I just want to acknowledge a few people that helped make this possible. This was a dream of the School of Journalism faculty, but a lot of people had to get on board. Michelle Smith, Dr. Phyllis West, our director, all of the journalism faculty and staff, Christine DeSalvo and her public relations agency team, Donna Tutanimes, Clifton Gold, Juan Cerna, Neil Waters. But most of all, you know, Jim, when I heard what happened yesterday, I called Manuel Aguayo, one of the UPD officers, and I said, we have to protect him because we don't know what's going to happen the next day after this. They jumped into action. They volunteered to be there with you every step of the way. They're standing by to take you back to your hotel.
And thank you to the officers back there. I wanted to say thank you. We can give them all a round of applause. They did.
Thank you, guys.
They did not drive me to In-N-Out, though. They did not drive me to In-N-Out, though, Bob.
They did not.
They did not do that. I just want to make that clear in case
But the
people
In-N-Out burger was
don't
something
throw
you
that
wanted,
one at me,
so, you
please.
know. We've reached the end of our time, and I do want to thank Jim and certainly Halima and Sean. We leave you tonight with the words of President Harry S. Truman, who once said, "I never gave anybody hell. I just told the truth, and they thought it was hell." Jim, continue to be a good role model and teacher for journalism education across the country. I'm proud to be your new friend, and you got a few others here that are dying to say hello. Our good thoughts to you and all the people at CNN. Say hello to Drew Griffin, one of my former students. Tell him to keep doing that investigative work. And you are welcome here anytime. Come on back. All right. Thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you, everybody.
And good night.